Hey everyone, Dr. Anthony Chaffee and Richard Smith here. Just letting you know, we just did a video in response to a recent interview with Giorgi Dinkov on Dr. Mercola's website, where he talks about how there could actually be dangers with a ketogenic diet and some of the studies that suggest this to be the case. So Richard and I have just made our response to this video, there's certainly data and studies that maybe show that there could be a problem with being in long-term ketosis. However, there are other examples of studies that show counter to that. So we just wanted to go through some of the literature with you guys and just let you know our thoughts on the subject.
Hello, health seekers. Welcome to another episode of the Keto-Pro Podcast with myself, Richard Smith. Today, I am joined with a very good friend of mine in the form of Dr. Anthony Chaffee. Dr. Anthony Chaffee, welcome on board. Again.
Thank you very much. Good to see you. Yeah.
Good to see you too. Good to see you too. So today, Anthony, I mean, the reason that we've decided to do this podcast, this recording, is in response to a recent post or YouTube video or podcast, whatever you want to call it, done by Dr. Mercola. And the title is A Surprising Reason Why You May Need Carbs in Your Diet, which you and I have both looked at. And we just wanted to sort of break this down bit by bit, I guess, isn't it? And issue our response, if you like, in regards to this, because so I'll just read out the story at a glance. So it basically says a ketogenic diet can be very useful initially when transitioning people who are metabolically inflexible, which I agree with. However, continuing in ketosis long-term can lead to problems, including stubborn weight gain and the inability to lose unwanted weight, which I completely disagree with. I mean, first and foremost, yourself and I have been ketogenic in the metabolic state of ketosis for quite some time. I don't have any problem losing weight. I think your body fat percentage. No,
I don't have any weight to lose.
No, exactly.
Well, that's stubborn. Right? It's very stubborn that I can't lose any more weight because I don't have any more weight to lose. So I guess he's right in that weird sense.
Yeah. Well, my body fat percentage is between 8 and 9% currently. I love my food. I eat like a horse. And I don't have any. I struggle to gain fat. So and we can go into all this as we go along as well. But let's move on to the second point at the story at a glance. The reason for this can be to do with cortisol, which, I agree, cortisol can be an issue. Your body needs glucose. And when deprived for too long, your body will release cortisol to stimulate the production of glucose by your liver. Cortisol also promotes inflammation, central obesity. So you don't want chronically elevated cortisol levels. It then goes on to say your metabolic rate is strongly affected by the type of sugar you consume. High fructose corn syrup promotes ill health, while whole fruit, raw honey, and pure organic cane sugar are readily metabolized without promoting weight gain. And then when adding in more carbs, you also need to reduce fat intake to avoid elevating your triglycerides, and restricting dietary fat and or blocking the oxidation of fat inside the cell has strong therapeutic effect against cancers by forcing cells out of its excess fatty acid oxidation state. Now, some of the points in there I agree with to a degree, but let's pick up on the first point. So, I mean, he goes on to elevated cortisol levels leads to central obesity, which I agree with. And we know it does. Just for example, while weight loss is the typical response when going on a ketogenic diet, months later, maintaining that weight loss becomes a struggle. And once Dinkov started the diet, or Ray Peat's recommendations, he lost the weight and kept it off. And he goes on to say, my take is that it's an endocrine problem, which I agree with. It is an endocrine problem. But I completely disagree with the fact that living a ketogenic lifestyle for long-term would have detrimental impacts in regards to cortisol levels. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, the fact of the matter is that well, look, if you're eating what you're biologically designed to eat, then your body is going to be doing exactly what it's supposed to do. And so whatever your cortisol is, it's supposed to be there. And so there are a lot of people that say, well, there's this marginal increase, and in the studies that show an increase, and most of these are in animal studies, in mice, they're preclinical, they're not in humans. Some are in humans, but most are in mice or rats, and they show a marginal increase at most in cortisol after long-term ketosis. They look at this as well in kids who are on ketogenic diets for epilepsy as well. And yes, there's a marginal increase in cortisol, but it's marginal. It's quite marginal. And the thing is that there's actually a lot of people that posit that marginal increase is actually a readjustment back to physiological levels, that your cortisol is actually being suppressed. This is part of metabolic syndrome. That's a known consequence of metabolic syndrome, is suppressed cortisol. And so that this is actually a rationalization of that cortisol. So, well, how can we look at that? Well, yes, if you have cortisol that's too high, you can get what's called Cushing syndrome or Cushingoid syndrome, and there's variations within that you can put on weight, central adiposity. You'll get peripheral wasting and proximal muscle weakness, striae, loose, sort of weak connective tissue. A lot of things. It's actually quite damaging. It's a corticosteroid. So, if you're getting, steroid injections and things like that, that you can't do that long term. That's quite harmful. And this is one of the consequences of that. You are never going to get levels like that on a ketogenic diet, certainly not a carnivore diet. And so, how do we know this, right? So your levels marginally go up, and there's actually plenty of studies that show that they don't go up at all. And that there are long-term keto studies over 2 years in humans showing that this actually provides physiological benefit. People keep losing weight, they keep the weight off, and they actually ameliorate the symptoms of hypercortisolemia, right? So whatever the cortisol is, the symptoms and soliloquy of hypercortisolemia actually goes away. So you can't say that this is causing a problem of high cortisol when actually the problems of high cortisol are being resolved with ketogenic diets. So it's not really, it just doesn't really fit. It doesn't follow that this is the problem they're making it out to be. And living proof, right? So it doesn't matter what studies say, right? Because studies can be flawed. They're trying to glean information from reality. But you can just look at reality and you can see and say, hey, there are a lot of people doing a ketogenic diet, a meat-only diet, their entire civilizations, the entire population of humanity that were living in the ice ages, in the in like the north and south of the equator, where there were no plants to eat at all. There was no honey and fruit ever. And, when there was fruits and so forth available, it was very, very rare for a week out of the year, 2 weeks out of the year. And they were very tart. They weren't very sweet. This is a very different plant that we're eating now. So their entire civilizations, going back millions of years, they never ate carbs. And we're always in this so-called ketogenic starvation state and this stress state. It's not a stress state. That's our primary metabolic state. That's the primary metabolic state of nearly every animal on Earth. Carnivores, because they just eat meat, they don't eat carbs. So lions are just dying of Cushing's, I guess. They look out of shape, big fat guts and everything like that, no weak muscles and hair falling out, things like that. And then but same with herbivores, right? Because they don't consume fiber and then break that down into glucose and absorb the glucose. They eat the fiber. Their bacteria eat the fiber and produce fat and protein. So cows eat grass, but they absorb fat and protein. So they're in a ketogenic starvation state, stress state, and their cortisol is going to be higher than cows that don't do that, maybe. But who cares? That's what they're supposed to do. That's the physiological state they're supposed to be in, just like us.
Yeah, for sure. Looking at this, he says that maintaining that weight loss becomes a struggle. I completely disagree with that. I've been, coming back to, I've been living this way for 11 years, 10, 11 years, I found that over time, I became gradually leaner and leaner. When I was competing, every time that I actively tried to lose weight in order to compete, I became considerably leaner every time, to the point where my body fat percentage was somewhere between 1% to 2% when I was on stage, which is unhealthy. That's incredibly unhealthy, but it was fit for purpose. Now, I don't have trouble losing body fat. Not that I've got an awful lot to lose, as you rightly say. But I mean, looking at this, the weight loss becomes a struggle. I think there are a number of factors to look at in regards to this. Is that, well, what type of ketogenic diet was he following? Was it a dirty ketogenic lifestyle? Is he eating too many plants? Is he consuming too much fat? I mean, what I find with the clients that I work with is that they are eating what's deemed to be a standard ketogenic lifestyle, which is 70 to 80% of calories that come from fat, with lots of green vegetables and things that contain lectins. And as we know, these lectins will bind to insulin receptors. They'll signal the body to store 5 times more fat. People eat, when you take away certain foods that they are eating, they'll gravitate more to foods that they enjoy, which, nuts and seeds, tomatoes, bell peppers, and things like this are all staples within a ketogenic lifestyle, which are incredibly high in lectins and will cause some sort of stall eventually if you're eating too many of the keto treats. Again, some of these do, some of these contain lectins. They also contain hidden carbohydrates, rogue carbs, I like to call them, in the form of, the carb killer bars will say X amount of carbs per bar, but when you look at the sweeteners in there, they use xylitol and maltitol, which can be absorbed up to 65% as carbohydrates. So there's lots of contributing factors. And coming back,
and can spike your insulin. I mean, there are studies showing that you can get reactive hypoglycemia when taking in artificial sweeteners, because your brain doesn't know the difference between fake sugar and real sugar. It just tastes sweet, and it just says, okay, there's sugar on the way, we need to produce insulin. And so you get a rise in your insulin, but you don't have carbohydrates coming in. You get hypoglycemia, but your insulin's up, and so that's changing your metabolic state as well.
Yeah, for sure. There's another few contributing factors. I've made a note here that a lot of people practice fasting to a massive degree when they begin. And I'm not against fasting. I fast naturally every day, but I do it intuitively. But fasting initially can be a contributing factor to elevated cortisol. The ketogenic diet also leads to increased water loss, also causing the loss of sodium. And if sodium levels within the body drop too low, the brain will send signals to our adrenal glands to increase levels of hormones that will regulate fluid balance, and cortisol is released along with these. So there's lots of contributing factors. If a ketogenic or carnivore diet contains too little sodium, cortisol levels may increase over time. But a well-formulated carnivore ketogenic diet containing adequate sodium, i.e. pink Himalayan, Celtic sea salt, and/or supplementing, will not alter cortisol levels. And another thing that we tend to do is we gravitate into a ketogenic lifestyle, which this will destroy you when I mention this now, is coffee intake. The whole bulletproof coffee thing. The fat coffees. People consume lots of coffee, more than they would normally, in a normal state. And coffee in the diet can increase cortisol levels. It can damage the adrenals and lead to increases in cortisol. So there's a lot of contributing factors in regards to this as well. I mean, when you begin to cut out these foods that do not contain the lectins, you move away from the artificial sweeteners. And once you start eating a more animal-based type lifestyle, i.e. consuming natural levels of fat instead of adding fat to everything, then the weight loss doesn't seem to be an issue. But now I'll share my screen with something I wanted to show you, because I get my bloods tested fairly regularly. If I can share this screen now. So this is the report on there. But what I wanted to show you was this. Now there's see if you can Can you see that on the screen there, those graphs?
Yeah.
Yeah. So now this study looks at the correlation between increases in cortisol and CRP. Now, I've had my CRP levels checked, and my CRP level is incredibly low. It's never elevated. Now, if my cortisol levels were increased, my CRP, according to this study, would be increased, but they're not. My CRP levels are incredibly low. Another contributing factor is DHEA. This works against cortisol, if you like, whereas DHEA levels will become lower when cortisol is elevated, and DHEA, which is produced by the adrenal glands, will fall. Now, mine is incredibly high. So I've never tested cortisol per se, but I've tested DHEA and CRP. And the reason that I don't test cortisol is that a blood test, Dinkov goes on to say about blood testing for cortisol. Blood tests for cortisol levels are not very accurate because cortisol will increase and decrease various amounts of times throughout the day. We know it increases in the morning, the dawn phenomenon. It can increase in the afternoon for a number of reasons. You could be stress related, again, coffee related. The only way to do this, and you probably know a lot more about this than I do, is a saliva test, which is one of those things you have to do repeatedly, throughout the day. So I'd even question, the way that we're testing the mechanism for cortisol there. But my experience in regards to CRP and DHEA show that my cortisol levels are incredibly low, and I have been living this lifestyle, as I say, for 10 to 11 years. And there's another study that I'd like to show. Let me just share the screen again there now. So this one is share screen 3. Let's open this. So this is a study that looks at body composition, hormonal responses to a carbohydrate restricted diet. Now, what the study yielded was fat mass was significantly decreased. Lean muscle mass was significantly increased, which is always good. There was a significant decrease in serum insulin, an increase in thyroxine, which is T4. And then it goes on to say that there was no significant changes in glucagon, total free testosterone, sex hormone binding globulin, IGF-1, cortisol, and T3. So, this is a study that shows no impact on T3 levels and an increase even in T4. So, I would argue there that,
and no impact on cortisol either.
And no impact on cortisol. So, which is, well,
I was just going to say, I think you're right, is how are we testing the cortisol? Are they doing serum blood tests? Or are they doing, when you're doing a saliva test, it's usually four saliva samples at different times during the day, or a 24-hour urine cortisol test. So the lab will give you a bottle, and you just for 24 hours, you start the clock and you just pee into that jug. And that's what you give the lab, and then that's more accurate. Or you can do a midnight cortisol. You just sort of get these things at certain times, and you can, sort of calculate, well, what do people normally hit around that time? What's normal? But, just getting one data point is not accurate, because, as you say, it goes up and down and up and down. And this is a problem with all hormones, and cholesterol even too, because they fluctuate throughout the day. And, people will say, oh, well, my thyroid hormone is down, my testosterone is down, or something like that. Like, okay, well, when did you get it tested? And I go, I don't know. Well, it matters. And were you fasted? Did you work out the day before? Did you have sex that morning? Like, all these things matter. They all actually make a big difference in how these results come out. And, to your point about, what kind of keto was he doing? There's a book that just recently came out with Dr. Chris Kenobi, who's an ophthalmologist and nutritional researcher. So he left clinical practice and just gone full-time nutritional research for years now. He just wrote a book called The Ancestral Diet Revolution, and he makes a real big case, again, a very strong case against seed oils, and how basically they are the major driving factor, probably even more so than sugar, in the rise in chronic diseases. And a major part of this would be like the linoleic acid and omega-6s, which damage your mitochondria. And as we are, people that have watched us, they probably have gotten the idea that most of the chronic diseases that we're treating these days come down to the mitochondria. If a major proportion of them do anyway. So that's a major factor. And one of the things that keto people do is that, I got to get a lot of fats, and so they're going to be taking NCT oils and other almond paste or whatever the hell they're eating, but they could be very high in these plant oils. They're high in linoleic acid, high in omega-6s, damaging their mitochondria. That this causes obesity, as Dr. Kenobi showed in his research, his published research, that as you increase the amount of omega-6 in your body, the percentage of fat in your body that's omega-6, it's directly correlated with obesity. Yeah. So the more omega-6 you have in your body, the more fat you are. And you just have to store onto this stuff because you can't use it. You can't use it as energy. And so, it has to store it, and it causes other sort of metabolic issues as well. So it causes obesity, it causes mitochondrial damage, and it also causes insulin resistance, right? And so, people are saying this, like, well, this is all from ketosis. No, it's not from ketosis. If that's happening to you, it's from something else that you're introducing to your body on your ketogenic diet, which is why, I and many others like yourself argue for, an animal-based, ancestrally appropriate, species-specific ketogenic diet. It's not the ketosis that's a problem. We're all supposed to, that's a normal thing. We're not supposed to eat carbs. There's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate, right? There are entire populations and civilizations. And this is recognized by, the international, medical boards and bodies and things like that, that there's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate. And that there are entire civilizations that never eat any carbohydrates, and they do just fine. They don't have any signs of disease or problems, and they're much more healthy than we are. And they're much more lean, much more fit, and don't have these chronic metabolic issues. So it's not the lack of carbs that's causing a problem. It's something else that you're doing. These are complex systems. And you can't just say, pick the first thing that comes to mind. Oh, that's what's it. That's it. That's the problem right there. Maybe, but you have to exclude all the other confounding factors as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, that's the reason that we wanted to go through this paper as well, isn't it? Is because, we've spoken about this previously, that we are constantly questioning, the things that we are saying, because we want to ensure that the advice that we give people is accurate. So I always welcome, papers or podcasts like this, because it gives us an opportunity to go back and dig that little bit deeper and see if we're missing something. And to be honest, going through this paper and studying, these little bits and pulling up all of this little information that we've been looking into has just reinforced the fact that everything that we are preaching, is accurate. And I believe that what we are seeing, is spot on. But yeah, I just realized that I jumped the gun in that study, because we went on to the thyroid part, which was the next part of that thing. Obviously, there was cortisol in there as well, but Dinkov goes on.
Just to hammer home the cortisol part of all that. I mean, there are so many studies that literally show the opposite. So there was a study done in 2021 in the Journal of Clinical Medicine, and it's called Salivary Cortisol Levels. It showed that salivary cortisol levels were significantly reduced after 8 weeks on a ketogenic diet, and body composition and biochemical markers were improved. So how long is he saying that this is going to be before we start getting these cortisol problems, right? And most of the studies that look at higher cortisol these are in animal studies. These are preclinical. These aren't in humans. So maybe this doesn't translate as well with mice as it does with us. And also, they're not showing that they're having Cushingoid side effects as well. That study I mentioned, looking at kids on a ketogenic diet for epilepsy, that was published in the Journal of Clinical Nutrition in 2013. It actually showed that when they came off a ketogenic diet, they all gained weight rapidly. So they weren't having a problem with weight. They were actually very skinny, and as soon as they came off of it, they slammed up their weight. And that's what they were studying. They were studying what would happen to their weight. Maybe they thought this was too restrictive, and maybe they were underweight, and they said, okay, can they catch up? Can they get fat like the rest of the kids? And they did. Yeah, they got much fatter pretty quickly.
Surprise.
And so, and when you look at this, as I've said, many times, it doesn't matter how brilliant your theory is, and it doesn't matter how smart you are. But if it doesn't agree with the experiment, it's wrong. And so there are studies out there that go counter to that. But also, what is happening in real life? What is happening to people that are on a carnivore diet? My cortisol is normal. I have checked it. And I have checked in my patients. I don't commonly do that because I don't think it's, really, I don't really think there's much utility unless you're actually worried about an actual endocrine problem that they have. So there's certain times that you test for this stuff. And in my patients on a carnivore diet, long-term carnivore diet, who have tested their cortisol, it's always been normal. It has never been high. And so I've never been worried about that. I've never actually had a concern of, oh my God, what is their cortisol level going to be? Because again, I go back to first principles. What are we supposed to eat? What are we designed to eat? We're designed to eat meat. And so if we're eating that and we're eating our biologically designed diet, well, whatever the hell our cortisol is, that's normal then, right? So we're looking at our blood tests and markers in the context of eating horribly and being sick. This is why all the reference ranges at different labs are actually changing. And the reference range for all these different vitamins, animal-based vitamins like B12, or fat-soluble vitamins like D3, K2, vitamin A, they're all just going down, 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 down. The reference range is going down because that's the new normal. Well, it's not indicating that you don't need as much for good health. It's that everyone's vitamin deficient, and so the average is vitamin deficiency. And that's what the lab measures, is what the average for the population is. So, that can be seen quite readily that we are actually getting worse. And so you have to look at these things in context. You say, oh, okay, well, the cortisol is X and this is X plus 1. Oh my God, that's a problem. But is it? I mean, they're saying that if your B12 is, in Australia, if your B12 is between 130 and 620, that's totally fine. So you can have a B12 of 300 and be like, oh yeah, you're well within the range. But that's an actual clinical deficiency. And there are studies showing that you can actually get demyelination of your nerve cells. You can actually get nerve damage from having B12 under 400. So how are we calling that normal? How are we calling 250 points below an actual vitamin deficiency normal? It's not normal. It's just normal because it's normal for people to be vitamin B12 deficient. And so if you really want your B12 in optimal ranges, you really want it between 800 and 1200, which is well above the range. Because, oh my gosh, that's dangerous. Well, of course it's not. But that's what people think who haven't looked into this, haven't realized that fact that we are chronically deficient in most of our hormones and vitamins and minerals, that if you have slightly higher, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It could be a bad thing. But again, there are these studies that actually show cortisol levels going down or not changing at all. And most importantly, that the signs and symptoms of high cortisol go away. And that's what really matters.
Of course, I agree. Yeah, and just to touch base again on, a point there that cholesterol being a perfect example, we're told to be within a certain range. Mine is well outside the normal range because normal people are unhealthy. It's the cholesterol range is unhealthy. Mine is 10.26, so it's twice what I am told it should be. And I wish that it was higher. So again, when you remove those phytosterols, your cholesterol restores itself back to a natural physiological level, which is considerably higher than we are told it should be, because as we know, cholesterol is essential for life. So yeah, these ranges are certainly open to question. But yeah, I think we've nailed cortisol there. I mean, the next thing then is thyroid. Dinkov goes on to say, thyroid is less than optimal. In fact, pretty bad for most people. They're at the upper limit of normal. A very large number of people are basically hypothyroid. And I think we are eating foods that are lowering our metabolic rate. We're living excessively stressful lifestyles, which, we could be. But me share the screen there now. I mean, this is a common study. This is probably one that you've seen a lot of. But, coming back to metabolic rate there, I mean, this study shows that this compares low carb, moderate carb, and high carb. The study was isocaloric, and it showed that a low carb lifestyle increased metabolic rate to the sum of 278 calories per day. So this goes against what he's saying about metabolic rate. We know that low carb increases metabolic rate, by quite a lot as well. Did you see that?
Are you sharing the screen? Right. Sharing up.
Apologies. It might help if I actually try to share that screen. There we are. Is that on now?
Yeah.
Hey, this technology stuff is difficult,
Yeah.
So this was the study: low carb, moderate carb, and high carb. The study again was isocaloric, and it shows a massive increase in metabolic rate. So again, this just goes completely against what Dinkov is saying there about metabolic rate and thyroid. So I mean, let's talk a little bit about thyroid issues. I mean, it's my take on this is the body becomes more responsive to these hormones due to beneficial changes in the cell structure and function when we're in a nutritional state of ketosis or being carnivore, for example. As a result, it can function normally at lower levels of T3. So when they're measuring T3, it's almost a case of we become more sensitive in a case of, as we do with insulin. So as we adopt a ketogenic or carnivore lifestyle, we need less insulin because we become more responsive. And I believe this is the case with T3 as well. So it's living a ketogenic diet seems to result in improved thyroid hormone sensitivity. So, for example, it takes less hormone to be produced to the same effect, which, if anything, puts less of a burden on thyroid hormone, T4.
And that's certainly what people like Professor Steve Phinney have found in his studies and his research, and he's been studying ketogenic diets for decades. And so, and the thing is too, again, what are these people eating? What are they doing? All these sorts of things, because that, is one thing that I stress with people on why they don't need to go crazy on organ meats is because vitamin A, having too much vitamin A actually suppresses TSH, your thyroid stimulating hormone, and that can actually suppress the function of your thyroid. So that can actually get abnormalities, and you can get too low of thyroid production and function and action. So that's not what you want. And so again, it matters what you're eating. It matters how you're doing this. You don't want to get these things out of balance either. But again, in clinical practice, I have, I don't even know, dozens at least of patients with Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So they're hypothyroid because of their autoimmune attack on their thyroid. They all improve, all of them, on a carnivore diet, the ones who will go on a carnivore diet. And there are other ways to improve as well, but that's the major way of improving. And I agree, there are a lot of people that are low thyroid, and most of these people are the ones eating a standard diet. And I see them in my office quite regularly. And even young kids, I've guys in their early 20s who were just like, I just don't have good energy. I don't really feel great. I want to optimize my health. You take a look at that, and they have pretty low testosterone, or not testosterone, well, testosterone too, relatively, but they'll have quite low thyroid and thyroid function and TSH. And you get them on a carnivore diet, that improves. It always improves. And so, you're getting rid of a lot of different, the benefits of going on a carnivore versus keto. There are a lot of things called goitrogens in plants, and they cause goiters, they cause thyroid dysfunction as well. So what kind of keto diet are they eating? Are they eating a lot of plants that have these goitrogens as well? And but I totally agree that you become sensitized to these things, and just like insulin, you don't need as much insulin because you're not dealing with all of these extra excessive metabolic stressors. And so, going back again, what are we designed to eat? And, if we're all hypothyroid, if we're in a ketogenic diet, well, that's it. No one's making it through an ice age, right? Because you can't survive, and people say like, well, maybe they just weren't optimal. Problem with that is that if you have low thyroid as a woman, when you're pregnant, your child will have what's called cretinism, which is congenital hypothyroidism. And that causes serious developmental abnormalities, low stature, deformed features, deformed limb growth, and serious mental retardation. So it's not a small thing having low thyroid. People die from low thyroid, and they're miserable the whole time. As I've said before, you're not eking out an existence in an ice age. You either thrive or you die and go extinct. And we didn't just thrive; we dominated. We dominated every animal in the ice age, even though we were pint sized compared to the megafauna that were going around. We were apex predators. We were taking down woolly mammoths for 1,000,000 years with sticks, right? Sticks and fire. You can't do that unless you are at peak physical condition and don't have very serious congenital abnormalities. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, I agree. And another thing that they don't take into account when we see lower levels of T3 is that levels of TSH also drop, which means that there's less impact on thyroid stimulated hormone to increase T3, which means the body is becoming more efficient. We don't need as much thyroid hormone because we are becoming more efficient. Exactly, as we said earlier, in the same way as insulin does. So, I mean, context is incredibly important when we look at this, Let's have a look at this. Anything else to add to the thyroid thing there, or do you think that we've addressed that one?
I think that just ice ages. You just say ice ages, and it just throws away all this stuff because we're there were no carbs, there was no fruit, there was no honey during the ice ages, and yet people did very well. And so if we're going to have all these serious problems, and they're claiming serious problems here, that wouldn't have happened. And so it just sort of when you sort of look at it through a clear lens, that's it just becomes a bit, I mean, it's a nice theory, and it's, good on people for trying to explain the observed phenomenon, but it doesn't explain it perfectly. It doesn't explain, billions of people around the world throughout history who have done this, and so, and the millions of people alive right now that are doing this and doing this very long term and don't have any of those same problems that he is espousing, and have never had problems losing weight, and have never, on keto. But that's the thing, like you said, a lot of people go keto and they do very well, and they might hit a stall, and then they go carnivore and then they drop a lot more weight and do even better off that. And so, there are, quite a lot of people, certainly millions of people, at least doing keto around the world, and many more doing carnivore. And a lot of these people have been doing this for decades, and they are simply not seeing the problems that are being described in, by this person.
You look at yourself and myself, and I don't think you'll mind me saying this, but we are not genetically gifted. People may think that, we are specially gifted with these miracle genes. I used to be clinically obese and type 2 diabetic and suffered with a myriad of health issues. I am certainly not, genetically gifted. I have beaten my genes or controlled them through epigenetics and changed my lifestyle. And now my body fat percentage is single figures, and I am thriving. And you've been living the lifestyle for a long time, and you were thriving also. And I think when you look at every carnivore, that you can think of on social media, none of them are overweight.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, just to the sugar side of things, I mean, that's quite a well-studied phenomenon. Now he's saying that maybe high fructose and all these sorts of things, like some of these things are bad, but that natural cane sugar is good. Tell me the chemical difference between high fructose corn syrup and cane sugar. It's literally identical. You have a disaccharide of glucose and fructose in natural cane sugar, right? So or glucose and fructose, and that makes sucrose, right? That's a disaccharide. But high fructose corn syrup is just a mixture of equal parts of fructose and glucose. So the only difference is that bond. But a lot of high fructose corn syrup, I mean, some of it's 53% fructose. It's not that high fructose, and 47% glucose, and some are slightly higher than that. But I mean, it's like 50, 55, 45 at the most. So it's very, very similar, nearly identical to cane sugar. And cane sugar, that disaccharide, that bond gets broken as soon as it hits your gut, and then it gets absorbed as glucose and fructose separately, exactly like high fructose corn syrup. So what are we talking here? Like, why are we saying that one is okay and one is healthy and the other is not? I don't think that holds water. Now, you could find some studies maybe saying that cane sugar is better than high fructose corn syrup. Who pays for those? Coca-Cola mostly. Coca-Cola pays for those, and Coca-Cola puts out 11 times the amount of nutritional research, spends 11 times more on nutritional research than the NIH, right? And Kellogg's and Pepsi and Nestle, they all do similar sort of things, and they're protecting their investment and they're pushing their agenda. And so there are plenty of studies, industry research out there showing, hey, you know what, actually sugar is not all that bad. And they had the same studies for high fructose corn syrup for a while too. And then people sort of got onto it and were like, hey, no, sugar is actually bad. Fructose is bad, mostly by the work of Dr. Robert Lustig, who, I've followed for years. And then they needed a scapegoat. They needed a patsy. And there was an interview with one of the Coca-Cola execs, and they were saying, oh, we're just so sorry, we use high fructose. Oh, should never have changed from cane sugar. Oh gosh, oh, if only we knew. It's like, well, why'd you do it? It's like, we just didn't know. Oh, we just didn't know how bad it was. Oh god, oh, we just didn't know. Oh, you poor thing. You knew damn well what that stuff was, and you know damn well now that cane sugar is exactly the same as high fructose corn syrup. It's just now that they're saying this, oh, it's natural. Arsenic's natural. Like, why? What does natural have to do with anything? So they're just using that as a marketing tool. And now they're putting out things that say, oh, look, cane sugar. Oh, that's okay. I'm sure it is based on the way you modeled that study. But, independent researchers looking into this, like Dr. Lustig, who actually just care about people's health, are showing very clearly that fructose from any source, once it reaches a certain threshold, will cause metabolic syndrome and fatty liver disease. That has been shown in clinical trials that satisfied the Bradford Hill criteria for causation. So now we have causative studies showing that fructose causes metabolic syndrome and fatty liver disease and can be reversed by removing it, as well as other things. I mean, there's even just removing seed oils and things like that. They have similar sort of results as well. But fructose is certainly in there. And so, saying that, just because it's natural, I mean, high fructose corn syrup is natural in a way. They make it from corn, as unnatural as corn is, So this is just marketing, and it's just a way to sort of shift the argument and take blame off of their product and keep selling this poison that people keep lapping up, and they think, wow, Coca-Cola is so responsible, they're so nice, they really care about me. They don't give a damn about you. They want to sell their products, and they want to do it at any cost to humanity that there is. And there's some that argue that they're intentionally doing things to cause harm, because they're heavily invested in the pharmaceutical companies, which then treat the metabolic syndrome and diabetes and cancer and all these other things that you get as a consequence of eating their horrible, horrible, horrible products. And so why would you ever trust a thing that these people produced?
Yeah. In fairness to them, I take my hat off where credit's due. It's the perfect business model, isn't it?
Yeah.
One makes you sick and the other offers you a pill to make you better. But unfortunately, to me, it's pure criminal, but it's a perfect business model.
That was sort of a joke I used to make, was that, when I play rugby, I'd be giving people head injuries and then, taking them in and fixing them,
Yeah.
It's a one-stop shop,
Yeah. But believe it or not, many moons ago, before I became or adopted a ketogenic carnivore type lifestyle, I was going to invest in a Domino's shop, Domino's store, Domino's Pizza. There was nothing in my area. I used to love eating Domino's pizza. This is when I was diabetic and clinically obese and super unwell. I decided not to, but I jokingly said to somebody the other day, imagine that I had actually gone through with that. I would now have the perfect business model, sell them a pizza. Yeah. And when they come in and moan that they're overweight, give them my card to come and see me in the shop to lose the weight. But you know what? The sad thing is, if I had gone down that route, I would be absolutely minted by now. And unfortunately, I'm not, because I've chosen this route. But hey, we've got to fight for what we believe in, and I stand by the things that we say and what we stand for. And I'm glad. I think I'd probably be dead if I did invest in a Domino's.
Yeah. Well, you may not have actually come to keto. You may have just
definitely
go down that hole, and so, it may be, maybe you would have had more money, but you would be a different person and you'd be living a miserable life. And I guarantee you that person saw the person you are now, they would trade any amount of money to be healthy and fit and happy as you are now in comparison.
Yeah, I agree. Right choice, I think. Not to buy a Domino's. So yeah, I mean, coming back to what you were saying there, it's and that's the next point that he goes on to say, is that he does go on to say how high fructose corn syrup causes disease. Yes, we know that. But he goes on to say, contrary to popular belief, there's a dramatic difference between high fructose corn syrup and cane sugar. And again, I think you've
3%.
Yeah, I think you've just ripped that apart. So it's he goes on to say they're really two different foods. Again, with you, I disagree.
Just not. I mean, chemically, that's just inaccurate.
Yeah.
They are not different foods. They are nearly identical. And sure, there is some suggestions that high fructose corn syrup can come with other crap in it that may cause a problem, but just the fructose is a problem, and that is metabolized and digested and absorbed and utilized exactly the same as fructose from any other source, be it honey or fruit or cane sugar. And the benefit the difference really in just cane sugar, which is just terrible, and that is almost identical to high fructose corn syrup, and it just comes on its own, right? So that's refined sugar that's not coming with anything else. And fruit comes with fiber, and that can delay the absorption, actually cause malabsorption issues, which some people may think that's a bad thing. If you're just eating highly nutritious food like meat, that's not a great thing. And but if you're eating crap, well, that actually might be a temper to the bad things you're eating, because you're not going to absorb as much. And this is something that Lustig has gone into, that when you're eating whole fruit, you absorb less fructose because it doesn't get absorbed because the fiber blocks it. It also blocks all the other nutrients as well. So that's not a good thing overall. But in the context of fructose, that can lower its effects. Honey is food for bees. We're not bees, but it does have nutrients and other things in it that can be beneficial to life in general. And so we're going to get some added benefit from the honey as well. But fructose, once it gets in your body, is just going to behave the same way. Now, you may get a significant benefit from the rest of the thing that's in honey, and maybe an overall improvement in some way, maybe, but fructose is fructose. That's what it is. And so, unless there's something in there that disrupts the metabolism of fructose, then you're not doing too well. Okay, maybe it doesn't change your blood sugar and this, that, and the other, and have all these big spikes like you do with just normal cane sugar. But it's still going to be, once it hits your liver, it's going to be metabolized into fatty droplets, and it's going to go down the same pathways as alcohol degradation. And you're going to get the same damage to your liver and the rest of your body from those breakdown products, like fatty liver disease, like diabetes, like heart disease. And it's even implicated in things like cancer and Alzheimer's. So this is not something that you necessarily want in your body. And it really doesn't matter if it comes from cane sugar or high fructose corn syrup. It's the same stuff.
Yeah. I've got an interesting study to come on to as well. But let's read on. So, I mean, he goes on to say how detrimental, high fructose corn syrup is. But again, we know that that's the case. He goes on to say,
I agree, but we just disagree that you can separate the two.
Yeah.
What's so bad about high fructose corn syrup if it's not the fructose and the glucose? Those are the only two parts of high fructose corn syrup. Those are the only two ingredients, right? what is the only chemical substance in sucrose? Cane sugar, fructose, and glucose. So what is the difference exactly? The bond, the chemical bond. Well, we know that we break that bond, and then we absorb these things as individual carbohydrates, as monocarbohydrates, right? Instead of disaccharides, we absorb them as monosaccharides. Okay, so what is the difference? He doesn't explain that. So what is it? Oh, high fructose corn syrup is terrible, bad, but this exact chemical copy is good, or at least not bad. That doesn't really make a lot of sense. It doesn't even pass the smell test, right? I don't need a study to tell me that that's wrong.
Yeah, I agree. So he goes on to say, can cane sugar be part of a healthy diet? I mean, as you just explained, we don't think so, but he says cane sugar is pure, or if it's pure, it has a very different overall systemic health effect than high fructose corn syrup. Again, there may be a slight difference, but again, what difference? It's all about context, isn't it? Now he goes on to say,
and what is he basing that on? Right?
Yeah.
What's he basing that on? He's going to be basing that off of industry research put out by Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
I don't doubt there are plenty of studies saying that cane sugar, is physiologically better than its exact chemical copy, high fructose corn syrup.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that that's true.
Yeah.
In fact, it almost certainly isn't if it's coming from an industry-funded research study, which
it
what
probably
the studies.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's the studies that are saying that.
Yeah.
Are the industry studies.
Yeah. So, I mean, he goes on to say multiple studies demonstrate that honey, which is a very similar composition to plain white sugar, does not trigger the normal hyperglycemic response that most of other simple carbohydrates do. In fact, it improves hyperglycemia in type 2 diabetic patients. Now, I've got a study.
I've got about 13 things to say about that.
Is it? Awesome. Let me share this study with you, and because this is an interesting one. Where are we? Let's share that screen. Brilliant. Do you want to crack on with something there, Anthony, while this is opening? Because my computer's incredibly slow.
No, that's fine. Yeah, I mean, think about it this way, right? He's basing that supposition not even on horrible industry research, funded by Coca-Cola, saying that cane sugar is better. He's basing that on honey. Okay, so he's saying, oh, it's very similar. It's very similar. Honey and sugar, and cane sugar are very similar. Really? Are they like nearly exact chemical replicas like cane sugar and high fructose corn syrup? Right? No. They actually a lot of honey has more fructose than high fructose corn syrup, A. And B, it has a lot of other nutrients in it as well. Again, this is the main sustenance for the entire species of honeybee, right? So, there are a lot of other things. Oh, it's very similar. In what way? In the ratio of fructose to glucose, because cane sugar has no other nutrients, none, but honey does. And high fructose corn syrup is nearly exactly the same chemical replica as the disaccharide cane sugar, right? And doesn't really have any other added nutrients as well. So in fact, it's much more chemically similar to high fructose corn syrup than honey. So that's a con. So you could say the same thing. You could say that high fructose corn syrup is very similar to honey. And since honey does all this other stuff, well, that means that high fructose corn syrup does, by the transitive property. Well, no, because there are other things that are going on here, right? So he is assuming a fact that is not in evidence. He is saying that A equals B and B equals C, therefore A equals C. But A does not equal B. Cane sugar does not equal honey. Cane sugar more equals high fructose corn syrup. And if cane sugar equals honey, then high fructose corn syrup equals honey, right? Which he is saying that it doesn't. And so that is a logically flawed argument.
You see the screen?
Yep.
Fantastic. So basically, this is a study that looked at honey and its effect on glycemic control in type 2 diabetics. And basically, the consumption of 50 grams of honey per day worsened glycemic control. So this is honey, and it does go on to say then that in agreement with these results, human studies on long-term effect of honey on glycemic control of diabetes patients is very scarce. Only 2 investigations have examined honey on glycemic control of diabetes patients. And it goes on to say that in agreement with us in the most similar study, and apologies if I pronounce this wrong, but the Barami study reported deterioration of glycemic control following ingestion of high and incremental doses of honey, increasing 1 gram per kilogram per day to 2.5 grams per kilogram per day. However, in the other study, investigation by Rats et al., honey consumption for 2 weeks had no effect on serum glucose in comparison with sucrose or high fructose corn syrup. Now, I believe that this is probably one of the studies that he is referencing, because it goes on to say the discrepancy in the results of the rats study with ours and Barami studies could be due to the control conditions. While Rats et al. Compared honey with sucrose and high fructose corn syrup, we and Barami compared honey with no honey. So again, context is incredibly important. So they're comparing sugar to sugar in effect, but when you compare no sugar, sugar to no sugar, there's a big difference. So again, it's easy to sway, your opinion into saying that honey is better than, honey may be better than sugar. But still, when you're comparing it to no sugar, then it's better still. I think, that study highlights a number of factors there for me that, context is incredibly important. And we know that honey is high on the glycemic index. It does cause glycemic issues. And honey is arguably one of the most natural sugars that we can consume. I completely disagree with this argument in regards to honey.
Well, and also, I mean, you can find a study that says anything, that concludes anything, but you need to look at that. Exactly. The context matters. The methods matter. You look how they did it, how they came across it. Were they doing serum cortisol? What time of day were they doing it? Was it doing, were they doing multiple draws a day? Were they taking, multiple saliva samples, 24-hour urine, all these sorts of things? And, you can conclude that, honey and sucrose are good for you. And yet, how did you come across that? What was your study design? How did you design it? Was it designed in a way that could even prove that at all? Or is it complete fluff, as a lot of these things are? And so, that's why there's so much variation in the literature. And that's between honest studies of people just doing their best, right? Maybe, or just trying to publish, because, in academia or any sort of, professional job in, medicine or the sciences, it's publish or perish. You just have to publish. So, just getting anywhere, you just need to be on published works. It doesn't matter what they are. It doesn't matter how garbage they are. You just need to get someone, it needs to be good enough to get published in something. And there are journals that you can pay to get published in. So, and what's amazing is that some don't even take those. They're like you could not pay me to publish your study, But the thing is too, is that, then there are the industry funded research studies again, and most of the studies on nutrition are industry funded studies, right? Yeah. And they buy and sell people in the WHO and the USDA, FDA, and politicians and all these different researchers. So even the nutritional research that's supposed to be independent, sort of a contradiction in terms, saying an independent government panel, because there's nothing independent about government. They're generally bought and paid for and have heavy influences coming down on them on what they need to put forward as their recommendations, guidelines, and conclusions. But even then, the majority of studies is not coming out by them. It's coming out from industry funded studies, because they just spend way more money on this. And so the literature is completely plagued with these just horribly fraudulent studies. And maybe the studies, they find there's like, oh yeah, no, that actually showed that something we didn't want to see. They just bury it. They just don't publish it. So the only thing you can guarantee from a industry funded study is that it will support whatever that industry is selling or doing. And that's it. It doesn't tell you it doesn't actually give you any other information other than that.
Yeah, I agree. Coming back to what you were saying about having to publish something, I mean, do you think this is why there's been like a big transition lately? So I used to have an awful lot of respect for Dr. Mercola, although he does promote things like turmeric. So I mean, yeah, since then I sort of lost a little bit of faith. I mean, this was the final nail in the coffin for me in regards to, trusting some of the things he says, because what I've noticed is a lot of the influencers lately, they are under pressure. They get paid for releasing content. Now, if you and I were to release content every day about how good carnivore is, and we are saying day in, day out, go and eat a piece of steak because it's really good for you. And the next day, go and eat a piece of steak because it's really good for you. And the day after, soon our views begin to drop. So do you get the impression that these influencers need to almost create a little bit of controversy? I mean, the likes of Thomas DeLauer and Paul Saladino and now Dr. Mercola, they're almost changing, their views on things that they've had for a long time. They're going against the things that they've been preaching for a long time. Do you think that there's a little bit of that play in there, that they are doing it in order to keep the views high and the followers engaged? Because if we were just to say every day, just eat a piece of steak, it's absolutely awesome. There's only so many times you can say this,
Well, I've come across that. I'm just like, what I sort of said everything that was sort of, the way I wanted to say it. I was like, I think these are important things to say. I sort of did that, about 6 months in to my YouTube channel. And then I was like, what in God's name am I going to do? Do I just stop? And I almost thought about stopping actually, and just keeping it there and just being like, I think these videos are very good. And this is going to give people information. And I don't want to water it down. I don't want to have a whole bunch of other things in there that maybe make it more difficult for people to find, the ones that I think are really important to watch, which is what I ended up doing is just making a playlist called Carnivore Essentials. And I think those are like the cornerstone sort of videos, I think, that people should know about, or hopefully, try to educate themselves on. And now I'm just, interviewing people, and that seems to be, it's certainly interesting for me. I really enjoy it. And I enjoy having these conversations and meeting people like yourself and others and discussing these topics. And people do seem to find benefit from it. So, thankfully, I can keep saying, just eat meat. And maybe I'll just do an experiment for like 30 days, just do a short every day, like eat meat, do it. Baker's basically been doing that, because he puts out a reel like every day of himself just eating a steak every day, and it works. It's just like, this guy is not messing around. Like he is dead ass serious about this, and people respect the consistency, I mean, there may be people that are trying to do something, sensational, to get attention, but they can be very, very sincere. I mean, I believe that, I've met DeLauer. I haven't met, Paul Saladino, but I've sort of texted with them briefly. I believe they're both sincere. I don't know Mercola. I mean, I know of him, but I don't know enough about him to comment. But my impression of the other two anyway is that they're very sincere, and they're trying to do the best that they can. And if they change their opinion, I think it's probably because they believe it, and they're trying to do something honestly. And whether or not I agree with them or others agree with them is beside the point. I do think they're coming across this honestly, and people can do that. And I think that if you do that and you just say, wow, I think that I may have been wrong here, I think that takes a big person to do that and to admit. It is a bit weird with Mercola. I mean, just this one interview, and now he's just switched 180, and it's just like, really? We couldn't have just maybe heard someone else's opinion on it? Maybe just looked at the research yourself. And, my question to Mercola is like, were you noticing this? If he was doing keto for a long time, was he getting fat? Did he have high cortisol? Was he getting striae and central adiposity and proximal muscle weakness? Was he getting weaker? Was he getting sicker? If not, then, why would he believe that? And so, it's just sort of that's a bit questionable, because if you're in good health and you're slim and you're slender, and this person is telling you that after a few weeks on keto, you're going to get fat and you're going to get stubborn weight loss and you're not going to be able to lose weight and you're going to get sick and you're going to have all these problems with high cortisol, and you don't have any of those problems, then something's up, right? A theory is only as good as what it's able to predict. And so if he's saying that people that do long-term keto are going to have these problems, and yet they don't get those problems, that's not a very good theory.
Yeah. And you question how long he was living, Dinkov, I'm speaking of a ketogenic lifestyle as well, because as you know, it takes an awful long time to adapt correctly. We can begin to produce ketones within a few days, but it takes months and months and months to fully adapt and upregulate those enzymes and pathways, particularly the monocarboxylate transporters within the body. So, I mean, it does take an awful long time to adapt into utilizing beta hydroxybutyrate as a fuel over wasting acetone and acetoacetate. But yeah, I find it interesting. I mean, it's Paul Saladino's work is the early work I think was spot on. I know he does an awful lot of surfing, so there may be an argument there for sugar within the diet, but it doesn't work for me. So I work with a lot of athletes. I've experimented many times over the years because I always feel like, am I missing something? Am I missing a trick? Can I improve my performance by living a ketogenic lifestyle, carnivore-based lifestyle, and utilizing carbohydrate in some form as a tool? But for athletic performance and for energy, it never worked for me. It never. And in most of the athletes that I tested in, and these are athletes who have been adapted for an awful long time, it doesn't seem to benefit. They come back to being carnivore. In fact, most of the athletes I work with now, and in fact, most of the clients I work with on a health basis, gravitate into becoming carnivore. They dip out, but then they soon come back. So it hasn't worked for me in my experience. But coming back to this sugar, anyway, Dinkov goes on to say that he thinks that the greatest confirmation that we have that sugar is not evil is that it depends on where you're getting it from. So basically, he looks at a study. One animal study demonstrated that when rats were fed free excess Coke, basically sweetened with cane sugar, they were eating the equivalent of 8,000 calories per day without gaining an ounce of fat. And in fact, I've got the study, or part of the study here. So I've got a theory on this as well. So this was the graph. I don't know if you can see that there. It's incredibly small, but it basically shows on the bottom that the total caloric intake was roughly 4 times higher without any excess weight gain. So basically what he's saying there is that cane sugar does not affect the body the same way that normal sugar does. But bear in mind, this was done on rats where they were able to consume as much Coca-Cola as they wanted to. I've got a theory, but do you want to jump in on that first?
Yeah. So what were the other 2 groups? What were they eating?
The rats were split into 3 groups. One consumed water, the other consumed light Coca-Cola, and the third consumed regular Coca-Cola.
Coca-Cola. Did they have a group doing the same with high fructose corn syrup and honey? So why are we saying that sucrose is better than high fructose corn syrup if that's not even included in the study? 8,000 calories a day. Yeah, you want to know what else the conditions are, but also it's like, is that all they were eating? So they're just completely malnourished, and so they're just wasting away, and they're just like dying of malnutrition, and but they just have a lot of calories. God only knows, and so yeah, that's a weird study, but it's it doesn't really prove anything. I mean, there's tons of studies just showing like, sugar intake and having this, connected to, serious diseases, and, Lustig showing, reversible nature of sugar. You're removing things with fructose, any amount of fructose, and replacing it with carbohydrates, glucose and things like that, and keeping people the same weight, telling them, no, you need to keep eating, you need to eat more today because you're losing weight. And so keeping people the same weight, so not tracking it up to weight loss and things like that, but just eliminating fructose, that reversed metabolic syndrome and fatty liver disease. So, God only knows, but, I would be suspicious on who's funding that study as well, whether they're reporting who's funding it or not, because a lot of these people just, they don't tell you, they don't disclose who's paying the bills for these sorts of things, which is, illegal and unethical, but it still happens. And so, this is probably one of those Coca-Cola funded research studies that God only knows how, corrupted, biased, and, and fraudulent it is.
Yeah, I agree. And another factor in regards to this is that Coca-Cola is incredibly high in caffeine.
Sure.
And we know the caffeine intake at a dose of around 4 milligrams per kilogram every few hours alters basal metabolic rate, increasing it by as much as 11%. So, I mean, we could, and here are the studies to show this as well. So, I mean, we've got, there's this study which shows that, caffeine increases metabolic rate. The caffeine's role in rats on metabolic rate and its ability to prevent weight gain despite consuming lots of food. And again, there's another one. So we know study after study after study shows that when we consume, excess amounts of caffeine, this can negate some of the fat storage effect of the food that we are eating. And if you were consuming that much Coca-Cola with that much caffeine, I would argue that much caffeine would be enough to offset any potential fat storage effect. So again, it's context. I don't think we can take too much into that. And again, it's an animal study. And I know, we reference animal studies, but they don't always translate, completely, because this is eating an equivalent of 8,000 calories per day as well. So, I mean, how you come to that.
Yeah, exactly. Did they account for, physical activity? Were these things just hyped up, because they're just jacked up on sugar and caffeine, that they're just on the treadmill, Jesus, just hauling ass on the treadmill the whole time, and, didn't get weight? Or did they control for physical activity? I bet they didn't.
No, of course they don't. And that's exactly what these studies, the study on my left screen there, it highlights that it increases metabolic rate, thermogenesis, and it allows, and this is why, caffeine is used by so many people, especially when they begin a ketogenic lifestyle initially, because it does have an impact on mobilizing fat. That increase in thermic effect and metabolic rate allows us to burn more fat. But unfortunately, excess caffeine, as we know, can damage the adrenals and lead to increased cortisol, which is another factor, coming back to the earlier point in the increased cortisol thing. So again, context is important. I don't think we can take an awful lot from this study. And I would argue that the excess caffeine content would negate heavily any potential weight gain from the caloric value that rat is consuming. Yeah. And every other study that we look at that's done on rats with Coca-Cola leads to memory loss and lots of other, severe neurological issues and conditions. So, I don't think, whichever way you paint it, Coca-Cola is not good for you, whether it contains high fructose corn syrup or cane sugar. So I think we've ripped apart that, the whole thing about the fats there.
Hey there, guys. Hope you're enjoying the podcast so far. I just wanted to wrap this up with the results from the study. So what the results actually showed is that the group that was consuming the Coca-Cola had unfavorable triglyceride levels. So the R group, which was the group consuming the Coca-Cola, showed higher triglyceride concentrations in the serum and liver. And the conclusion from the study reads as follows. Based on the results, it can be concluded that daily ingestion of large amounts of fructose, rich soft drinks resulted in unfavorable alterations on the lipid profile of the rats. Thank you.
He goes on to say about the glucose cortisol link. The problem is that if your glucose level is low because you're on a low carb diet, your body is going to compensate by self-generating glucose, and that the stimulus to make glucose is part of the obesity puzzle, because one of the ways in which your body produces glucose is by secreting cortisol. Now, that's true, because cortisol will allow us to create glucose through gluconeogenesis, but we don't need. So what I find is, and what the studies would suggest, is early on in a ketogenic journey, when our ability to produce ketones or burn fat is incredibly low, we will increase gluconeogenesis to compensate. And therefore, in early stages, cortisol is incredibly high. But this soon dissipates. This drops incredibly quickly as we adapt. And now we don't need to rely so much on gluconeogenesis. And therefore, the reliance on any cortisol is massively reduced. And coming back to a point you said earlier, if cortisol is released, then it's there to serve a purpose, and it's there to serve a natural physiological function. What are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, so I would just submit that there, when was this done? So there's a study on it's called the long-term effects of ketogenic diet in obese patients by Dosh et al. In 2004 in the Journal of Experimental and Clinical Cardiology. And this followed obese patients for 24 months in humans, right? So it's not an animal study. That had significant weight loss, p-value of 0.0001, right? So it's very statistically significant. They dropped their total cholesterol, increased HDL, lowered LDL, lowered triglycerides, and significantly lowered their blood sugar levels. And they had no change in their urea or creatinine. So, like long-term kidney function was not affected or worsened by this, right? And one of the quotes from the paper was that ketogenic diet is known to ameliorate all metabolic complications associated with hypercortisolism. All, right? So this is after 2 years. So, this is a long-term study. They're looking at this, and they found that this dramatically improved, all the different sorts of, made all the different health benefits that we talk about. And there are clinical trials in humans showing that this reverses type 2 diabetes. And so, that's wrong. And also, ketogenic diets, and this was quoted in the paper as well, that in patients with both ACTH dependent and independent cortisol hypersecretion, ketogenic diet is advised during and after surgery or medical management of the primary condition. So people that have high cortisolism for whatever reason, now that's going to be have some sort of tumor that's secreting tons of cortisol or some other sort of medical reason for this, and you're going to be being treated for this, they put people on a ketogenic diet to ameliorate and fix those signs and symptoms of hypercortisolism. Okay, it does the exact opposite in clinical trials in humans than what he is suggesting. So again, it doesn't matter how brilliant your theory is, and it doesn't matter how smart you are. If it doesn't agree with experiment, it's wrong. And there was that other study that I mentioned too, that they followed patients for 8 weeks, and they found a significant reduction in cortisol in humans with a ketogenic diet. So, there's mixed studies. We know why. Some are just not looking at things properly. They're not putting things in proper context, and they're coming up with conclusions that they probably don't deserve to come to, or they're bought and paid for by, different interests that don't have, truth in mind when they're putting these things out. They just want to sell a product and push an agenda. And there are plenty of studies out there showing the exact opposite of what is going on in humans, long-term follow-up. So with very statistically significant results and outcomes. So yeah, I just, the idea that this is just a foregone conclusion is wrong. We are not seeing these results in, actual fact in people. I have never seen someone have the issues that he is suggesting people would get. And maybe and so I had mentioned this, but I mentioned this to you earlier. I'm actually debating Mr. Dinkov this weekend. So this podcast will probably come out after that debate goes on. But I don't know which one's going to come out first. So people can look out for that. But I may just my entire argument will just be a picture of me with my shirt off, on 6 years of a ketogenic diet, and just be like, none of these are happening. So, that's the thing. They'll say, well, that's an outlier. That's a one-off, or this and the other. But no, it's literally every single person that I've treated long-term or helped long-term or know who's been doing this long-term. No one has gotten these problems. And the studies also show in humans with long-term follow-up that it's literally the exact opposite of what he's saying.
Yeah, 100%. For sure. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that, actually. I'm hoping that you'll be well armed now after this prep, but for sure, the information is there, the studies are there, you've got the studies, and they're human studies, which is incredibly important.
That's it.
As well. He goes on to say then that, where was the next point? Chronically elevated cortisol can be an issue and lead to chronic inflammation. Well, we know elevated cortisol, but inflammation is, let me share this one. So, he comes back to fructose. We know that inflammatory markers living a ketogenic lifestyle are massively improved when we are living a ketogenic lifestyle. But there are studies like this one which shows that fructose, can induce inflammation and increase cortisol. So this shows the opposite to his argument in regards to inflammation and cortisol. And again, so this study after study after study goes on to say then that basically the metabolism is not working properly, but our metabolism we know is incredibly healthy. All hell breaks loose. The body releases an emergency vasodilator known as nitric oxide. Now, nitric oxide is incredibly beneficial. That's not a bad thing. He goes on to compare nitric oxide with nitroglycerin. I don't think you can compare these two. One is produced naturally in the body, and the other.
From a vasodilatory sort of effect, yeah, maybe. But there are tons of studies showing that more nitrous oxide and UVA stimulates nitrous oxide in the body. You know what I mean? And that has been shown to confer great health benefits. And so it's a bit funny.
Yeah, he goes on to suggest that so basically your metabolism is not working properly. If you're not oxidizing glucose properly, you're not going to produce sufficient amounts of carbon dioxide. And what happens then? Vasoconstriction. But I'll share another one.
So you're saying that people get high blood pressure on a ketogenic diet?
Yeah.
It's like that. That's literally that's also been shown to have the opposite effect.
Which is exactly
I have so many patients, and literally every patient of mine and people that I've just spoken to that go on a carnivore diet, they all come off their blood pressure medication or at least significantly reduce them in short order. And actually I have to warn people about that, saying if you are on medications like blood pressure medications or diabetes medications, you need to be careful. You need to check your levels. You need to check your blood sugar and your blood pressure, because your need for these medications will go down.
Yeah.
And so now you will get hypoglycemia and become hypotensive, and that can be dangerous. And so you need to be on top of that and work with your doctor to potentially reduce your medication. So again, this is just not what we're seeing in humans.
Yeah, exactly. So this whole vasoconstriction thing is it's a lot of rubbish. We know that keto increases nitric oxide, increased nitric oxide production during a ketogenic or carnivore lifestyle increases or leads to increased relaxation of blood vessels, And we know that this is associated with better blood flow to the heart, the muscle, as well as better control over blood pressure, nerve signals, and immune function. So everything there that he's just said is completely, ripped apart, and is in fact quite the opposite.
Was that a study? Your study hopped down. You had a study up. Sorry.
Yeah. So basically, it was just showing that keto improves vasodilation through the mechanisms that we just described. Okay. So it's the opposite to what he is saying there. Now, another thing that I think that I've missed somewhere in the study, he goes on to mention about the Randall cycle and insulin resistance. I'm trying to find that part specifically, but I can't find it there. But I know you've read the study. Have you got any thoughts on the impact of living this lifestyle, the effects of the Randall cycle, and becoming keto causing insulin resistance?
Well, I mean, keto cannot cause insulin resistance because you're actually lowering your insulin, and you actually become much more insulin sensitive. And so, and this has also been shown. I mean, there are some suggestions in some poorly designed studies where they give someone a can of Coke 3 months after they've been on a ketogenic diet, and they say, oh wow, look, it has a bad response, therefore insulin resistance. Well, no, that doesn't necessarily mean that. It means that their blood sugar went up for some reason. It doesn't mean that they're insulin resistant and that's causing that. It just means maybe they don't have a lot of insulin right away, and their body doesn't respond quick enough. And that's exactly what it is. When you're eating carbohydrates all the time, this is toxic to your body. You're having high blood sugar chronically, causes glycation, causes damage to your other molecules in your body, damages you from the inside. This is why we measure HbA1c. This is a direct marker of metabolic distress, damage, and greatly increases your risk for metabolic disease and heart disease and other diseases as well. Going on a ketogenic diet lowers this. As a funny story, it actually lowers that, and it also lowers your need for insulin. You become much more insulin sensitive, which is why you become you start improving your blood pressure. People improve their erectile dysfunction. And that's because now you're becoming more sensitive to insulin. Insulin plays a role in vasodilation as well. And so now you're sensitive to this and your body works properly. So when you are eating carbohydrates all the time, because this is toxic, because this is poisonous, because this is damaging you, your body has to preload your beta islet cells in your pancreas with insulin because it has to be ready to go at any time. It's just like you live in a bad neighborhood. You may have a loaded gun under your pillow because you get broken into every other week. So it's like, no, not again. And so, if you're getting broken into every night, you might want to arm yourself, right? And so that's what your body does. And so it arms itself with insulin. As soon as you get that dose of sugar, slams out the insulin to try and mitigate the hell that you are putting on your body by putting in exogenous carbohydrates, right? And so when you don't do that, your body says, oh, okay, we moved to a nice neighborhood. We're not getting broken into anymore. I can put the gun in the safe. And then all of a sudden the alarms go off and someone's breaking in your house. And you're like, shit, what's the password? And you're trying to desperately get this thing out. There's a delay, right? But then you get it out and you're able to defend yourself. Fine. There's a delay. When you start eating carbohydrates for a few days, your body goes, oh, Jesus, this again. And you start pre-making insulin. And they find, in fact, that people are more insulin sensitive at that point because their bodies have healed. They've recovered. They become more metabolically flexible, if you will, which is a stupid term. But in that context, but it's you've allowed your body to heal, and it actually works better. So you have to look past the surface, right? You have to scratch at the surface to see what else is going on. You can't just say like, oh, well, we did this one test and that's it. That's all there is. Well, no, it could be that, but there could be something else going on as well. And in fact, when people have looked further, they found that this was actually to do with the fact that you just don't need to pre-make this stuff. If you don't drink alcohol for a year, you're going to get drunk quicker. Why is that? Does ketosis give you an alcohol allergy? and now you're more sensitive to it, and now you're just like, it's more toxic. No, it's just that you have built up defenses and a tolerance in order to protect yourself. And then you didn't need to do that. Your body's efficient. It's not going to build up defenses and spend energy and use resources if it doesn't need to. And so if you're not attacking your body and putting horrible chemicals in it, it's not going to have to defend against them, as readily, right? And so that's the same thing here. So you built up carbohydrate tolerance because, you've been putting this substance in your body that's harmful, and your body's building up a resistance to it. And then when you get rid of it, your body goes, oh, thank God, we can finally like do something else more reasonable. And, it takes a bit of time to build your tolerance back up. And that's it. That's the only thing. Now, there's this idea with the Randall cycle that, if you're putting in fat and you're putting in carbohydrates, your cells just go, whoa, too much overload. We're going to lock this down. And now, no more energy can come in the cell, and this has to go elsewhere. Simple solution there: don't eat carbs. We were already doing that anyway on a ketogenic diet. I mean, that's like, so problem solves. I mean, like, so how is the Randall cycle causing a problem when the Randall cycle is all about the conflict between fat and carbohydrates, exogenous carbohydrates, when that's the whole point of keto, is that you're not taking in exogenous carbohydrates?
Yeah, and that's exactly the point. I love that analogy about the gun and being in the safe, because that I can picture that, and that is picture perfect. That is exactly what is going on, isn't it? Due to the Randall cycle, it puts the body into a semi-diabetic state, because it decreases your insulin sensitivity. And again, I think you've just nailed that 100%. It's a case of, if your body does not require insulin, i.e. if you're not consuming sugar or carbohydrate, then your pancreas is not going to release as much insulin. And as you say, that the troops become lazy, but that's the second you test, that system again, it's almost as if the body upregulates incredibly quickly. It knows that it is doing, sugar burning again, and it will upregulate, sort of phase 2 or phase 1 insulin secretion, because that's the first part that becomes affected. But it can be upregulated incredibly quickly. And one of the reasons that they suggest that, so it isn't a case of becoming, semi-diabetic or insulin resistant, because one of the things that they're looking at when it comes to this is that, they're checking HbA1c. And as you know, when we've been living a carnivore lifestyle in particular, this can become increased. Now, HbA1c, the H is hemoglobin, which is used for carrying oxygen in the body, and not glucose per se. So that's its job, is to carry oxygen. But the longer these cells live, the more glucose that they acquire. And that's what living a ketogenic and carnivore lifestyle does. It extends massively the lifespan of the red blood cells. So, the average amount of glucose that is going to be on there during the HbA1c, which covers a level of 3 months, is going to be considerably more. So it may appear that our glucose is higher, when in fact it's just a case of the cell is living a longer lifestyle. So we don't become insulin resistant. Glucose levels not increased, because of insulin resistance. The body just becomes more efficient and healthier, and cells are living longer. And again, that phase 1 insulin secretion can be upregulated incredibly quickly. But I think you nailed that with, the gun in the safe analogy. It takes a little bit longer, but once that gun is out, your aim is spot on, and you're back, firing on all cylinders, as it were.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing too. This has been clinically proven. Ketogenic diets have been clinically proven to reverse type 2 diabetes, reverse it. And so, people are going from, and carnivore as well, which is a ketogenic diet, or should be, in my opinion. And, we just did, that episode that series Reversed, it was called Reversing Disease with type 2, with carnivore diet. There was a lady who was a type 2 diabetic. She was very skinny, so she wasn't overweight, but she was very metabolically sick. She was type 2 diabetic. She was on a lot of medications, and she had very poor control. Her HbA1c was 13.2, right? Massive massive. I mean that equates to, you know, blood sugar levels in American standards, like well over 200 every day, all day, and well over 200, right? So, you know, even into you know, higher than that, into the 300. So it's an insane HbA1c, right? That dropped down to like low fives, right? In a few months. Okay. So it was right away that was changing, because again, this is, you know, like you said, this is a 3-month turnover, or we assume it is, because that's the average lifespan of a red blood cell in the body. And that's because after a while, yeah, well, that's it. You know, most people are sick. Most people are metabolically unwell. Most, you know, 90% of Americans have at least one metabolic disease, right? And so, you know, 70% of Americans are overweight or obese. The rest of the world is not far behind. Some are worse. You know, as far as overweight and obesity goes, America, as I think last I checked, was like, we were number 19. So, you know, there's a lot of people worse than us for obesity and being overweight. And certainly obesity. I think we're the 19th. I think that was for obesity. We're the 19th most obese country, America. And so there are other countries that, I mean, I think our obesity rate is like around 40%, maybe 42%. And there are others like in like the Pacific Islands, like 60% obesity rate, right? So now some of those guys are just big monster islanders that are just built like brick houses, you know? And so like, you know, because it goes by BMI, which is a stupid metric. So I'm obese according to the BMI, right?
Me too.
And so, you know, you probably would be too. I mean, every bodybuilder would be obese with 2% body fat, right? And so, you know, that just tells you how silly that way of measuring things is. But either way, you know, people are inarguably sick and getting sicker. So, but either way, you know, the textbook teaches 3 months on average for red blood cells. And the reason being is that the cell membrane starts to get a bit stiff. And so they have to be able to fold around, go in these capillaries, are tiny little things. Sometimes the red blood cell will have to fold in half, sort of squeeze through these little tight corners, right? And so if they can't do that, if they're going to get stuck somewhere, obviously that's going to cause a blockage. You're going to kill off parts of your body. You're going to, you know, cause, you know, little mini strokes all over your body, and your brain has a lot of these little things, and that can't happen. And so the spleen is a bit more sensitive to that. All of a sudden it just starts struggling through these little capillaries, just whacks them and eats them, right? And pulls them out. So when you're eating a bunch of omega-6s, a bunch of plant sterols, because cell membranes are cholesterol, right? The cell membrane is cholesterol. You know, so how is cholesterol bad for us again? When we are literally made out of cholesterol. Every cell in our body is made out of cholesterol. Almost every hormone in our body is made out of cholesterol. So it's a bit funny to say that cholesterol is bad for you when we are cholesterol. And so when you get these plant sterols, it can actually replace some of the cholesterols in there, and they're not as good. They're stiff, and so you can actually get artificially low HbA1c in someone who eats a lot of, you know, plant sterols and things like that, and plant oils, because the red blood cells aren't living as long, and they're getting pulled out of their system quicker. And then you can get inappropriately or artificially high HbA1c if you're actually a lot more healthy, and you don't have all these plant sterols and other sorts of inflammatory factors, because, you know, and there's other things that can cause your red blood cells to live longer, that, you know, now they're being exposed to blood sugar longer. And so, like you said, people on a ketogenic diet or a carnivore diet, they're just exposed, their red blood cells are living longer, and so they're exposed to this, and they're being compared against the 3-month average, but maybe they're living 4 months, 5 months, who knows? You know, we haven't really studied that, but we do know that phenomenon exists, and you can measure people's blood sugar, and you can see it's just like, you know, 74 every single day, every single time you check it, or 60 or whatever it is. And so it's consistently in a very good range, optimal range, and people feel good. And then you check their HbA1c, and it's something, you know, akin to, you know, not pre-diabetic, but sort of approaching that, and where you're sort of like where you would expect someone to be seeing, you know, their blood sugar, average daily blood sugar would be like 120 or something like that, and yet their average blood sugar is 60 every day. And so, that obviously means that there's a discrepancy there in how long their red blood cells are living. But again, we have studies, clinical trials in humans showing, large studies with lots of patients, showing that ketogenic diets, any ketogenic diet, can reverse type 2 diabetes. And as Dr. Kenobi points out in some of his research in his book, which is insanely well researched, there's like 1,300 scientific references in that book. So it's huge amount of references. So that, some of these things, really improve a lot more if you get rid of the type of ketogenic diet you do. So ketogenic diets that are high in seed oils, they don't do as well, right? But you get rid of those seed oils and go more to animal fats or to saturated fats, not the polyunsaturated fats and the linoleic acids and the omega-6s. You get away from those, and people do much better. But either way, we're clinically reversing type 2 diabetes. So what are we talking about here? It's going to raise your HbA1c, it's going to cause diabetes, it's going to cause insulin resistance, and yet it does the opposite in clinical practice. So it's wrong.
Yeah. I've never worked with a client who came to me as a diabetic, who adopted a ketogenic or carnivore style lifestyle, reversed their diabetes incredibly quickly, and never become diabetic again. And these people, so it just doesn't happen. And you could argue that these are people who are predispositioned to be, diabetic. Long-term ketosis and being carnivore does not make you insulin resistant or diabetic.
No, it was literally the original treatment for diabetes, especially type 1 diabetes back in, because the type 2 diabetes was just, as rare as hen's teeth. Before the 1980s, more for the 1980s and 1990s. But like in the 1800s, before we had insulin, the ketogenic diet was the only thing that kept type 1s alive.
Yeah.
It's the only thing, and so, we've actually been using ketogenic diets to have better survival in type 1 diabetics. And that's the thing too. You can get diabetic ketoacidosis in type 1. So people go, oh my God, I can't go on a keto diet because I'm going to get, DKA. And it's like, no, actually it prevents that, which is quite significant, so it allowed people to live longer and potentially survive when otherwise they wouldn't really. And, when type 2 diabetes came in, this is just perfectly regulates your blood sugar, because you're not bringing in anything else. So what would you rather do to regulate your blood sugar? Would you want your body to make blood sugar and keep it exactly at the right level all the time, no matter what? Or, just take in a random amount of carbohydrates at random times throughout the day and get these big spikes and insulin spikes and blood sugar spikes and corresponding insulin spikes, and have no control really over your blood sugar and what it does. So, that really doesn't make sense. You obviously, the constant blood sugar that your body controls and regulates tightly, it's obviously going to be much better than slamming up your blood sugar to 180 and then, dropping it down and then spiking it up and dropping it down, spiking it up. Obviously that's the wrong thing to do. And so how are we trying to argue that doing that and having consistently higher blood sugars on average how is that going to be better for diabetes? People come off of insulin. People have been on insulin for decades, and they come off insulin by going on a ketogenic diet, right? For type 2, and there are animal models showing that you can even do this for type 1, and that going on a keto diet or even just fasting for 4 days out of the month in mice, equivalent of 4 days fasting, is enough to actually stimulate the regrowth of your beta islet cells and start producing insulin again. They're trying that in humans to see how that goes. We'll see, but they can do it in mice anyway. And either way, they definitely show they could reverse type 2 diabetes and perfectly control type 1, and even reverse it in some cases. So, it's it's just funny to me that we're even having this conversation, with the thousands and thousands of studies that show the rampant improvements in health that ketogenic diets provide. I mean, we haven't even touched Alzheimer's and things like that, but I mean, and psychiatric disorders like major depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, OCD, even schizophrenia can be reversed with a ketogenic diet. And I just don't care what it does to your cortisol after that. If you're not hallucinating and you can actually lead a normal life, hashtag worth it, buddy.
Yeah, for sure. And that would be an interesting one to do after this, actually, is maybe sort of the Alzheimer's and other sort of brain issues and improvements associated with the lifestyle, because that's something I've been researching a lot lately. I interviewed Patrick Holford this week. Interesting podcast. But yeah, that'll be a good one. But completely agree. I've worked with there's a lady that I work with who was diabetic for 23 years, lived keto for a year and been carnivore for 2 years. So 3 years in a ketogenic lifestyle, or in the metabolic state of ketosis, the fittest and healthiest she's ever been. She now competes in triathlons, runs marathons, and she's won her age category in a few of these triathlons after being clinically obese and diabetic for 23 years. No signs of diabetes returning, and all of her health markers are absolutely incredible. So I mean, if 3 years isn't good enough to use as a trial, then I don't know what is. And again, you and I, have been considerably longer than that. So the proof is in the pudding, isn't it? I think you'll like the next one. Now, you are well versed in this over myself. Dinkov goes on to talk about cancer and how sugar doesn't feed cancer, basically, and fat is the issue.
That's cute.
And I know this part was almost laughable to me, because we know that all cancer cells are metabolically inflexible. They cannot be fueled by ketones. Every cancer cell is fueled by glucose. There is another fuel source, or glutamine. There's not so much we can do about glutamine because it's required for lots of other processes in the body. But every cancer cell is fueled by glucose. But he goes on to say that I think some of the ideas around glucose feeding cancer cells stem from two basic misunderstandings. One is that cancer is an evil cell, genetically mutated, and the other, and that your only chance to kill those cells because they're not going away by themselves. So I mean, first of all, that's not true. Spontaneous remissions of cancer is well known. In prostate cancers, pretty high rate of spontaneous remission. And another paper came about 5 years ago from MD Anderson Cancer Center in Texas, said that always before the position of medicine, the cancerous mutations happen, and that the cell becomes metabolically deranged. But it looks like we have got this backwards. It's the metabolic derangement that happens first, and over time this triggers the genetic mutations of the cell, and then the cell being... Go on.
Yeah, I agree with that part.
Yeah.
It is a metabolic disorder, and it's the damage to the mitochondria that kicks off free radical species and can damage the DNA and cause more mutations. And potentially there are mutations that you can have that speed this along. Certainly, those genetic mutations are actually they actually affect the mitochondria, though. So you can have these genetic changes, certainly, and that can predispose you, give you a familial predisposition to cancer, or an individual one if you had a de novo mutation. But generally these mutations affect the workings and function of the mitochondria. So it does come down to that, I think. And I think that's what the evidence shows anyway. And but I mean, Otto Warburg showed 100 years ago that cancer cells require 400 times the amount of glucose as normal cells, because, like you say, they can't do oxidative phosphorylation. They can't process ketones properly. Form equals function in the cellular world. And so they've lost the form, they've lost the function of normal working mitochondria. They lose the cristae, which are the inner membrane surfaces in the mitochondria that have, that perform that function of converting, different, chemical energy into ATP. Right. And so they can't do that anymore. So now you've got, substrate level fermentation as opposed to phosphorylation, oxidative phosphorylation. Right. They don't run on fat because they can't, they've lost that function. And they do require a lot of glucose, because they're metabolically very active, but also because they require more because they're very inefficient at producing ATP from glucose or glutamine or anything else. And so this is why we track cancer cells throughout the body by using radioactively marked glucose molecules, right? So this is what a PET CT is, right? So a positron emission telemetry, like this is like the CT that we do. We inject you with this sort of radioactive glucose, and it shows up. It's radio opaque on the CT, and you do a PET scan, and all of a sudden you get this boom, this big globe in your lung, and you're like, ooh, that's not good. That's not supposed to be there. And so that's how we track that. So we know they run on glucose. Where's the fat? We're not sending in radio opaque fats. So I mean, where is he making that argument that that's actually fat driving it or fat feeding it or the fuel is fat? Because I have never heard anyone argue that, and I've never seen a single paper supporting that.
No, me neither. It goes on to say that if the mutations are secondary to metabolic derangement, it's got to be one of these two macronutrients that we can manipulate to actually cure cancer. They've already tried glucose restriction. That did not cure cancer. Well, I would argue
that's not true.
Against
completely
that.
Untrue.
Yeah, it did have sensitizing effect to chemotherapy, but did not result in actual cancer remission. Again, I'd completely argue against that.
Complete garbage.
So now we're back to the other macronutrient.
Factually incorrect.
completely. And we know this. We know this. So now we're back to the other macronutrient, restricting supply of fat. Multiple studies, I have at least 30 on my blog, have shown that restricting lipolysis by administering the beta blocker, you may know as well, propranolol. There we are. Spit that one out. Lowers lipolysis. So I mean, it goes on to say that lowers blood pressure by blocking adrenaline. If you're blocking adrenaline, you're also lowering lipolysis, because adrenaline is the primary activator of hormone-sensitive lipase enzyme. Basically, you go in to restrict the supply of fat to your own tissues, to the tumor. But it's, that's the complete opposite.
So sorry to interrupt, but it's just pure supposition, right? So he's saying that propranolol can help, and this is why. Well, you have no evidence for that. You have no reason. You have nothing to base that on. You're proposing a mechanistic explanation for that, but you have nothing else apart from your posit that that says that's true or not. It's just like, well, it has this mechanism, and I bet you this is why that helps. Like, okay, nice theory, prove it. Like you have to prove it. You can't just float out a theory.
Yeah, and it's known time after time. We have seen cancer patients reverse their cancers through living a carnivore, ketogenic type lifestyle. I've worked with two myself. I worked with a young boy, 7-year-old boy, who cancer treatment failed, chemotherapy failed. He adopted a special ketogenic type lifestyle that we put him on, and he is now cancer-free without chemotherapy. Yeah, there's another lady that we worked with breast cancer. She continued with chemotherapy and a ketogenic lifestyle and is also now cancer-free. So make from that what you will. But one thing for sure, this young boy was on lots of fats, lots of protein. The one thing he wasn't consuming was carbohydrate or glucose. And study after study shows, we've seen that as, again, by the Warburg effect, that cancer cells are metabolically inflexible. they are fueled by glucose. And this whole hypothesis that it is fat that is causing this, is laughable to me. But propranolol, yeah, I'll have to work on that one. all of these super big words that we throw out every day, and I can't pronounce one that's half the length.
Well, it's just a different language, and you just get used to saying these stupid words. But yeah. So yeah, it's just practice.
Yeah, and to be honest, as far as medications go, that's not one that I'm entirely versed in. I'm not trained in medicine. Nutrition.
It's a beta blocker,
but it's
so it's a beta blocker. So so it can be used for blood pressure. It can be used for rate and rhythm control. So people with atrial fibrillation, because quite often people will get fast AFib, and so your heart's kicking off a lot of ectopic beats, a lot of signals, a lot of chemical sparks, right? And your muscles respond to electricity, right? You give like electric stim, it'll tense your muscle up, right? So that's how your heart contracts. Pacemaker cells kick off and just make like a little electric burst, and that electric signal propagates through from cell to cell to cell to cell, and you get that contraction, right? And it's done in a certain pattern. So the top of your heart contracts first, and that signal goes down to the bottom of the heart, and then the bottom heart goes. And so that's how that goes. And so, but when you're getting ectopic beats, ectopic meaning extra, and then you're getting a lot of mixed signals, and you get atrial fibrillation because you're getting so many signals that the top heart is just going and it's just stuck. So that's called atrial fibrillation, because it's fibrillating. If you look at it and you actually do open heart surgery, you just sort of moving like my hands is fibrillating. But there's only a one path down through the Purkinje fibers down through the septum of your heart, from the atrium down to the ventricles, that can propagate that signal, and then it starts the whole process over again. So then it just goes. Whereas this, like, in the atrium, you're getting beats from multiple areas, and it's just stuck, right? But then your ventricles are just beating way too fast, and it's all like different rhythm as well. And so it's not healthy, and you can kick off clots and things like that, and get massive strokes. And so propranolol and metoprolol and all these other lols, if they sort of end in that that sort of LOL, they're these beta blockers, and that can slow it down. And so it literally stops your heart from being able to beat more than like 40 to 60 beats a minute. And sometimes a bit less. So it's just this metronome. It's just very slow. It doesn't matter what you're doing. And so if you're trying to play sports and you're trying to get your rate up, it's not going to happen. So you can't get your cardiac output out at all. It's very difficult to exercise at that point. But that's what it's for, primarily the beta blockers. But you can use it for blood pressure as well. You can also use it as an anti-anxiolytic. So, for anti-anxiety, this is actually a better thing to do for most people if they're going up to a known event that causes them stress, like a family dinner or a speaking engagement. People have difficulty with public speaking. It's actually fairly common for people to take a beta blocker, and then you're just like a metronome. So even though you're going up there going like, oh my God, I'm going to be freaked out, it's just like, you can't actually amp yourself up. Like it's chemically blocked. And so you just go up there and be like, I should feel freaked out right now, but like, I am worried about this, but I don't feel freaked out. It's like, okay, I can just go ahead with it. And so, if you're going up, you can't predict everything, but if there's something that you're coming up to that you can predict, like, hey, I've got these interviews and things like that, then you can anticipate that and do that. And it works quite well, because it's not, it's not addictive and habit forming like beta block or like benzodiazepines like Valium and Xanax and things like that are, which is a common thing to do, but they're they come with too many problems. You don't want to do that. So beta blockers can be a bit better. And apparently they cure cancer. So there you go.
Yeah, interestingly, I was prescribed beta blockers years ago for anxiety. Obviously, I never understood the mechanism behind it, but it didn't work. They did work, but I didn't like the way that it felt. Living this lifestyle has cured all of these issues for me. You know, I am completely medication free now. So, I mean, again, you know, diet and lifestyle trumps everything, I think, you know. But yeah, I mean, I think we've gone through all of those points in there. You know, he does go on to mention something about you know, cholesterol being negatively affected and increasing being bad. But I mean, I don't even want to go into that because we know, you know, cholesterol is absolutely essential. He does mention a few points, you know, about the benefits of vitamin E, and I agree. You know, there's benefits of vitamin E. You know, we all know. But again, I think that
fat soluble vitamin, by the way, not a carb soluble vitamin.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 100%.
Well, so, I mean, but you know, I mean, the thing is, you know, he's talking about, you know, the damages to your cholesterol. Well, you know, who cares, you know? But at the same time, again, you know, that 24-month study on ketogenic diet, they actually found total cholesterol went down, HDL went up, LDL went down, triglycerides went down. So even by conventional metrics, that improved cholesterol. And it improved by our standards as well, which is, you know, HDL going up, triglycerides going down, and you know, having, you know, a much more likelihood of having the large buoyant LDL cholesterol molecules, which are, you know, very beneficial and healthy, and you know, and blood sugar going down, HbA1c going down, things like that. So the long-term follow-up in humans show again the opposite.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, again, you know, LDL is essential for life. That's what heals and repairs the body. So massive miscommunication in regards to the importance of cholesterol there. But I mean, it is. And I think, you know, within our industry, exactly. I don't think that's even worth the airtime, to be honest. But
yeah.
You know,
well, I think if anyone's watching this or knows this, they know those arguments. And if they don't, they can look at our other podcasts. And, you know, I have one that's just, you know, it's called The Truth About Cholesterol and Heart Disease. And I go through the studies and the history and how this was actually laid out by the sugar companies and bought and paid for with industry research to vilify cholesterol and exonerate sugar. And, you know, they paid off a bunch of Harvard professors. They paid off Ansel Keys, that douchebag. And one of those professors was named head of the USDA. He was the one who authored and published the 1977 declaration saying that cholesterol causes heart disease. And that's what changed the world. So we know this is fraud. We know this is this was perpetrated as a fraud in order to protect the investments of the sugar companies. And that's it. You know, that's all it was. Cholesterol was never a problem. I don't even check it unless a patient like specifically asks for it. And then it's just like, I don't care. It doesn't matter. It was never a problem. The only thing that I really care about, you know, if your HDL is high, your triglycerides are low, you know, that means that you have more of the large buoyant LDL, but also LDL being high. You know, there are studies with hundreds of thousands of patients showing that the higher your LDL cholesterol, the longer you live, and the less risk you have of going to nursing homes, getting dementia, getting Alzheimer's, getting Parkinson's. And, you know, it lowers cancer risks in a lot of demographics as well. And so, you know, this is just not the problem that we've been told that it was. Just plain and simple.
100%. One of the biggest studies that I usually reference is on the BMJ. It covers 68,000 participants. And it shows an inverse association representing 92% of the participants in regards to LDL. Basically, it shows that the lower your LDL, the higher your risk of death. Mine at the last check was 8.26. I'd like it to be higher. But yeah, in fact, I think it came down ever so slightly from the one before. Not that I check very often. As you say, I'm comfortable in regards to my body being fit and healthy. If cholesterol is elevated, then that's what it's meant to be. If my LDL is up, fantastic, that's what it's meant to be. And there are other contributing factors that can alter this as well. If you become unwell, as if you test, you know, around the time of a virus, obviously cholesterol is used to fight off that virus, and infection can be lowered. So you know, I don't test because I'm worried. I test usually just to prove to other people, especially in correlation with you know, a CAC score. So I've got zero calcification of my arterial wall yet. My cholesterol is double figures. So, I mean, take that from that what you will, but cholesterol is essential for life. And we know that, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think we've covered all of the the big factors on there. Is there anything else that you wanted to add to that?
No, I think the main take home from this is that you can find studies that say anything, but look at what other studies are out there. See, is that the entire embodiment of the literature? Or are there other studies? And then you compare the two and look at them and see who paid for them, see where they came from, see the methods, see the p-values, see if they're statistically significant, see if the methods and the results justify the conclusions that were drawn. If they don't, then you don't consider that study. You look at that study and you're like, yeah, that concluded that, but that's wrong. I'm not gonna listen to that one. And so that's the thing. You can honestly and intelligently come at this and come to very different conclusions, because there is just such a wide body of information and studies out there, and they are completely diametrically opposed. So one of them has to be wrong, and if not wrong, then lying. So it's just a matter of trying to figure out which one is which. And again, I think it comes back to first principles. What are we biologically designed to eat? What is our biological nature? What were people eating during the ice ages, when we were thriving, when we were 6'4" on average, when we were killing woolly mammoths with sticks? That's what I want to eat. That's what I want to be like. And that's what I want my kids to grow up as. And, and what do we see in clinical practice in humans? Do we see people getting, Cushing's by being on keto for a long time? No, we don't. And we see that in the studies as well. And so those studies are much more likely to be accurate because they are lining up with the observed facts and reality, which is people stay lean, they don't put on weight, they don't get deranged cortisol. I mean, some people don't even get raised cortisol at but none of them get symptoms of hypercortisolism, I should say. And so that's the observed facts. The observed facts are when people go on a carnivore diet, a ketogenic diet, they get better. They reverse diabetes, they reverse insulin resistance, they reverse hypercortisolism, and and they like the study said, they ameliorate all symptoms and signs of hypercortisolism. So that's what matters. What matters is what happens to real people, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get information in order to live better lives. We say, okay, well, this guy's saying don't do keto because that can cause these problems. But that's not actually anything that anybody ever gets. So, you have to sort of wonder about that. Or maybe some people are getting them and some people aren't. Okay, well, if all of them are on a ketogenic diet, they're all in ketosis, they're all abstaining from carbohydrates, but they're getting different results, then it's obviously not the carbohydrates. Obviously, it's not the ketosis. It's something else. And you and I are perfect examples of that. We get very different results. Everybody I talk to gets very different results than that. All of my patients get very different results than that. There are people that have problems and you work through them. And there are generally things that are going on. They're still including in their diet. They're still eating and drinking certain things that, throw a wrench in the gears. I don't have as much experience with keto. I've never been a keto coach. I'm not even a carnivore coach. I just talk about carnivore and I try to help people with it if I can. But I've never had to, had to go through all of that of just keto. Or why isn't this working? I'm already past that. I'm just like, hey, there's more bad things out there than just carbohydrates. And this is why you're seeing mixed results with keto, because some people are doing really high fat animal based keto and they're doing really, really well. And then others are having, some other stuff too, and they're not doing so well. Well, why is that? Well, they're both doing keto, but they're including different things in their meals. Exactly. Or excluding different things as well. And so for me, it's very easy. Yeah, stop eating that crap. Just eat meat. It's very easy. Doesn't matter what's harming you. It goes away when you just eat meat.
Thanks again for coming on board. Pleasure as always. I know, you need no introduction, as it were, into where to find you, but I always like to add it in at the end. Where can people find you?
Yeah. So, YouTube is my main channel, just Anthony Chaffee, MD. And my podcast is just called The Plant Free MD. And Instagram is, again, Anthony Chaffee, MD. Twitter is Anthony_Chaffee. And you can basically find everything that you need from there. And as I think we're putting this on both of our channels, Richard, how do people find you? Where do they
you
see your
can find
stuff?
me. Again, YouTube is Keto-Pro. It's the same on Keto_Pro on Instagram, I believe. My personal account, I've recently changed to my name, which is Richard_Anthony_Smith. I've come away from the Keto Athlete UK. I did change it to Carnivore, but then I thought I might as well just roll with my name. So I've changed it to that. And obviously lots of free advice available direct from the website, which is www.theketopro.com. You can find me on Facebook, Richard Anthony Smith. Again, you can find Anthony Chaffee on Facebook as well. And I think that's about it. I think any Google searches would find us quite comfortably. But fantastic, great chat. And again, as always, Anthony, pleasure. And I look forward to the next one.
Thank you, sir. Me too. Great to see you.